All right, welcome everyone. Welcome to another YMCA Education Series talk. My name is Pam Rakansky. I'm the YMCA YES facilitator here at the North Suburban YMCA. Welcome for joining us today. Today we have Mardi and Jordyn who will be talking to us. Mardi Scott and Jordyn Scorpio. Today's talk is supporting friends in toxic relationships. I know I'm excited about this one. Sweet. Okay. We've all been there, a friend or loved one in a relationship that we don't think is good for them. What is the best thing for us to do in that situation? We're going to talk about that today, and SHALVA is going to help us to learn how to distinguish between healthy and unhealthy and abusive relationships while gaining insight into what support for people in unhealthy and abusive situations looks like. I'm so excited for this empowering conversation ahead of us. And with that, I'm going to introduce Mardi first. Mardi, welcome.
Hi, nice to be here. So I'm a member of the Y, and a big part of the Y is strong bodies, strong minds. And we all know about the strong bodies, heading over to the Y and working out. There's a whole nother part of it, and that is our strong minds. And Ellen Rachna kind of helped me make that connection. I was talking with her about it while I was working out at the Y and telling her how I'm a volunteer at SHALVA with continuing ed. And we thought that would just be a perfect match. And I connected with Pam, and we're here to talk about this relationships that might be toxic, how to support our friends, how to help us have healthy relationships so we can build those strong minds. So I'm going to turn it over to Jordyn. She is from SHALVA to teach us more, and we welcome questions, and we do want this to be a little bit interactive as well, and I'll be monitoring the chats so we can learn further about this topic to strengthen our minds, which in turn will strengthen our bodies. Thanks.
I love that. Thanks, Mardi. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. Thank you guys for taking time to be a part of this important conversation. So again, my name is Jordyn. I'm the Director of Community Education with SHALVA. I've been at the organization for all of COVID, so however long that's been. I started right before COVID in January 2020. And I oversee all of our community education, as well as a specific focus on a new healthy relationship program that we have. I love talking to different pockets of the community about this topic in all different ways. The more we're talking about what a healthy and unhealthy relationship is, the easier it is to recognize it and think about what we can do to support ourselves or our friends or loved ones. So it's really special that you guys are all here today, being a part of this conversation. Before I dive into my presentation, two things. One, as Mardi said, would love for this to be as interactive as you all want it to be. So to start with, if you have any questions along the way, please feel free to interrupt me. I'm from New Jersey. I talk a lot. So please feel free to interrupt at any point. If you have a question, you can use the hand raise or just kind of say, hey, Jordyn, can you give me a second? I can answer any questions you have. Or if you're more comfortable, you can certainly put it in the chat. You can also, as Mardi said, she's going to be taking a look at the chat. And just so I don't miss anything, if you have a question you want to ask, but you feel uncomfortable sending it to everybody, you can maybe send it directly to Mardi and she'll take a look and ask it for you. The more questions, the better. So please feel free to ask away. Before I dive in, I'm going to share my screen and I have a little presentation to share with you all. I do just want to say that obviously this is a heavy topic, and hopefully it will be eye-opening for you to learn a bit more about what toxic, unhealthy, abusive relationships look like and how you can support others. But it also might be upsetting for you. You never know how these things are going to hit you on any given day. And just knowing kind of the prevalence of this, we really do want to take care of ourselves as we're going through this. So please, like, if you do feel like you need to step away from your computer during this time, feel free to do so. And don't worry about it at all. I'll also just add a couple of links to the chat right now. Here's the link for the Illinois Domestic Violence Hotline. Here's the link to the network, which is an agency. It's a membership agency that we're a part of that oversees kind of all of the Chicago-based agencies. And then of course, here is SHALVA's website with more information and education as well. So if you need some support right away, whether it's calling SHALVA's helpline or calling another helpline, you can get all the information you need on any of those websites. So I'm going to go ahead and dive right in. Let me share my screen here. And we'll go ahead and get started. Hopefully you can see my presentation. Yeah, I think you can, right? Great. Okay, let me go into present mode here. Make it a little prettier for all of you. Present full screen. Great. Okay, so supporting friends in toxic relationships. I'm going to start by talking a little bit about SHALVA, just so you have that baseline. And then we're really going to dive into what domestic abuse is. Having that kind of foundation, especially because there are a lot of, I think, stereotypes of what we think an abusive relationship looks like. I think it's important to really break down what these relationships often look like to help us understand who in our life might want our support or might need some support from us or somebody else. And then of course, we're going to talk about how to talk to somebody and the best approach. And we'll, if we have time, I have a couple of scenarios for us to kind of talk through after we kind of gain that knowledge. So about SHALVA, our mission at SHALVA is to support Jewish women who are experiencing and healing from domestic abuse through counseling, supportive services, and community education. We offer community education in all pockets and really just, like I said, try to do outreach as much as possible on our team, as well as our direct counseling services. And to ground you in this statistic before I go into like why we do this work and the importance of these conversations, these are the statistics I really like to share. 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men will experience abuse at some point in their lifetime. Women between the ages of 18 and 24 are at the highest risk for being in an abusive relationship. And especially important as we are in Pride Month, the LGBTQ plus community members are affected at equal and often reportedly greater rates than the general population. So just some really staggering statistics to think about, especially as we know these are reported statistics. And there are certainly, you know, my guess would be that, you know, this is actually not the reality. And there's even more people that don't report having ever experienced abuse. So really kind of staggering to think about and hard to think about, but important to ground us in. And I will say again, like, this is why it's really wonderful that you're all here, a part of this conversation. So just to share a little bit about SHALVA, first of all of our services are free. And I'll talk a little bit later about financial abuse, but the prevalence of financial abuse and abusive relationships really is at the core of why our services are free. We don't want anybody to have money being a barrier to needing to access our services. As I mentioned, we do a ton of community education. Both in and out of the Jewish community. So sometimes, like we do a lot of work, for example, with police stations in more Jewish populations. So like in Rogers Park, for example, we do trainings about how you might interact if you're going on a DV call and it's an Orthodox household, you know, kind of giving some background as to what you might want to be clued into, things like that. So all sorts of community education. We have great online resources on our website. One thing I'll mention that's very relevant to the conversation we're going to be having today, we have a new tool called Show You Care. And this is an anonymous tool on our website that you basically, it's for somebody who's worried about somebody in their life. You answer a couple of questions about that relationship, and then you get guided to these short educational videos that will help you think about how you might want to talk to this person based on how you answered the questions. We're going to be talking about a lot of that stuff today, but this is a great, again, anonymous tool that anybody can access. SHALVA really cares holistically about creating a safe community. And one of the ways that we approach that is this program, 7 Circles, which is the program I mentioned earlier that I launched and oversee. It's for young adult couples where at least one partner in the relationship identifies as Jewish, to really explore their relationship on their own, to really learn kind of how they're each showing up in their relationship while they're gaining tools for how to have a long-term healthy relationship. So very fun program. If you know any young adult couples, spread the word. At the core, and this is great for you all too, as I mentioned, you know, if you're leaving this conversation and you're concerned about your relationship or somebody else's, our helpline is a great place to go. So our helpline is answered by wonderful staff, and it's a great way, like if you do think that you want to set up an appointment with our counselors, if you're experiencing something or healing from something, if you're not sure about a relationship and you just want to kind of gut check with somebody, you can call the helpline, whether it's yours or somebody else's. So the helpline is a great number to know. And I just want to mention, I know not everybody on this call you may or may not be identified as Jewish. Anybody can call this helpline, and if it ends up that you aren't somebody who would be able to access our other resources, we refer out all the time, and that's part of the services of this helpline. Lastly, I'll mention we have an Orthodox Rabbinic Task Force, which is a really unique service that we offer. It's trained Orthodox rabbis who are kind of a go-to for our Orthodox clients in a lot of different ways, which is really cool. And just a little bit, if you're interested in our free counseling, 18 years or older, married or unmarried, current or past relationships. So a lot of clients call us when they're no longer in their abusive relationship, but they want to date again, and they're really scared, for example, right? So current or past relationship, anybody who self-identifies as female, and anybody who self-identifies as Jewish, or they are or were in relationship with somebody who is Jewish. Our therapy is offered in person as well as over the phone and video. And it's culturally sensitive to the Jewish population, as well as trauma-informed, and is also offered for as long as needed. So there's no cutoff for our clients, 6 sessions and you're done. Many clients come in and out over time, all sorts of things. And for those current clients who are attending counseling, there is some limited legal and financial assistance that we offer as well. Okay, any questions about SHALVA? Cool. Let me get to the meat of what we're talking about. Before I really dive into the nuances and the different types of abuse that somebody might be experiencing, I really like to show this slide. The reality is domestic abuse, this topic, toxic relationships, all of these ways that we talk about this, there's a lot of gray area, and it's a really complicated issue. And that's why it's hard to talk about. That's why it's hard to identify. That's why it's hard to get support for yourself or someone else. So I like to kind of simplify by showing this and giving a really basic example of a behavior and the difference between healthy, unhealthy, and abusive related to that behavior. So this example is around finances. In a healthy relationship, there is total equality and economic partnership, right? We agree on how we're spending our money. We agree on how we're saving. We agree on everything related to finances. Unhealthy is you might disagree with your partner over finances. And to be like, whenever I talk about this, I like to say, like, for those of us in partnership with somebody, we might move into this unhealthy space sometimes. Like, we all have growth to do in our own relationships and ways to be healthier in our relationships. And so sometimes we might find that we do fight over finances. That's a really hot topic for a lot of couples. The difference between unhealthy and abusive is the power and control. It's not that you're fighting over money, it's that one partner has total power and control over the finances, and they don't give their other partner any ability to access money, to make decisions about money, you know, anything related to that. So that's really the core difference between unhealthy and abusive. It's that power and control. And just to lead into, this is the definition of domestic abuse. It is the systematic pattern of power and control for the sole purpose of manipulating an intimate partner. Although the next slide, we're going to talk about physical abuse momentarily, I do like to point out that this definition has nothing to do with physical abuse. While physical abuse manifests in some abusive relationships, in a lot of abusive relationships, there's never physical abuse. It's a lot of other forms of abuse. And that is really the core of abuse, is the power and control. And sometimes that comes out physically and sometimes it doesn't. Oftentimes, the earlier warning signs of an abusive relationship are going to be those non-physical warning signs that might then become physical later on. But it's really, although we often have this vision of like a black eye or bruises or things like that, that's not always the case. And in fact, oftentimes, somebody will call our helpline and say, you know, I didn't think it was that bad because they never hit me. And that's not always the case. So if somebody's asking questions like that, like, oh, I'm experiencing this and this and this, but they never put their hands on me, so I don't think it's that bad, or I don't think it's abuse. That's one of the stereotypes we really try to break down at SHALVA. So now that I've said that, just to talk about physical abuse briefly, it is the classic, you know, pushing and shoving and choking and things like that. But it can also be, you know, standing in a doorway, confining somebody in a room. It could be withholding medication or food from somebody. It could be threats of physical abuse to somebody's partner or to themselves. You know, that I'm going to kill myself if you leave me, things like that, that can be really triggering and can be often fit under this physical abuse piece. It could be, you know, there's also kind of a classic, you know, somebody throwing something at a wall right next to where their partner is standing, or punching a wall right next to their partner, never physically touching them, but certainly physically threatening right around them. So that's, you know, physical abuse isn't always there, and it's well beyond, again, that kind of that stereotype we often have. Emotional abuse, I would say, really is probably in every single abusive relationship. It is such a big category and it means so many different things. And the manipulation that somebody exudes over somebody else for that power and control is core to abusive relationships. Gaslighting is a really, kind of more common term now, I think, and I like to say it's like crazy making, right? We had an amazing speaker. Our annual luncheon is every June. It's coming up in a couple of weeks, but a couple of years ago, we had a speaker. She was somebody who was never physically abused by her partner, but the emotional abuse she experienced, the gaslighting she experienced by him was so traumatizing. They lived in a smart home and he would travel a lot for work. And while he would be gone, he would turn the heat up really high or turn it down really low. He would blast music at 2 o'clock in the morning, like do all of these things. And he would come home and she would say, why did you do that? And he would say, you're crazy, I didn't do that, right? He would try to make her feel crazy. He would gaslight her. Isolation is core core. I think if you're, you know, a little bit worried about a friend and you find that they're not around as much as they used to be, isolation is certainly a tactic somebody will use, because if they're not close to their friends anymore, if they're not around their family anymore, the friends and family might be saying, oh, they're in this new relationship, like I don't, you know, they don't have time for me anymore, it's so annoying, or they've stopped coming to pickleball or book club or to the gym with me or whatever it is, and I'm so frustrated. They're in this new relationship, it's all consuming. But what it actually could be is their partner is isolating them from a support system that they might want to reach out to down the road, and they feel like they can't anymore because they haven't been around as much, and the friends aren't as receptive. So I always encourage people to kind of keep that in mind as well, because the isolation is something that we might, as friends of somebody or loved ones of somebody, get frustrated by that isolation. But if we're feeling other, you know, certain kinds of ways about this relationship and we're feeling the isolation, it is important to not get frustrated by that, but to really kind of think on a deeper level about, okay, maybe this isn't really in their control and they're not around for other reasons. The humiliation, the bullying, the belittling, and certainly sometimes like those things can happen in front of other people in jokey ways. Something I like to say a lot is, and this information it's a lot of information, right? And sometimes people ask very specific questions. What about XYZ situation? The reality is, trust your gut on this stuff. You might have a friend. I know, like, I am in partnership with somebody who, we are very sarcastic people, and he might say something to me in front of my friends and we crack up. But if somebody else in a different relationship says the same thing, it might make everybody in the room uncomfortable, right? Maybe it is a comment that, feels humiliating to that person. It's situational. It depends how it feels in the moment to you and others around you. And that's where trusting your gut is so important, and kind of reading the room. There's not a, this is okay, this is not okay, generally speaking, around some of these things, but it's really about how it feels and how it's coming across. So emotional abuse really is core to so much of that power and control. Tech abuse, I mean, I mentioned the speaker we had a couple of years ago, where tech abuse certainly played a role. Technology is really great for a lot of reasons, and it's also really scary, especially for survivors of domestic abuse. Whether it's, somebody having control of their smart home, whether it's air tags being used to track somebody. A lot of survivors find those air tags on the bottom of their car or in their purse, and somebody's tracking them and they didn't even know. In addition to that, of course, something else you might recognize as a friend or loved one of somebody is somebody, you're out to lunch with your friend and you see their phone, they have 25 texts from their partner and they seem really uncomfortable with that, right? That is not normal, and they start sweating or they say, I have to call right now. Somebody who's calling or texting constantly and it feels very uncomfortable, and they feel like they seem really anxious around it, that is certainly something as well. Financial abuse. So I mentioned this a few times already, but financial abuse happens in something like 95% of abusive relationships. No matter how a couple is presenting to the outside world, if they live in a beautiful house in Highland Park, if they both have great jobs, if there's abuse going on in that house, it is very, very likely that the person being abused does not have access to their own finances. It is such a way to control somebody in a relationship, because if you don't have access to your money, then how are you going to ever leave this relationship, right? How are you ever going to make a plan to leave? It also becomes very isolating. And there are certainly signs you might recognize as a friend, right? If somebody needs permission in a very, again, like in a very uncomfortable way, if you say, do you and your kids want to come with me and the kids to Six Flags or whatever it is, and you say, I have to, they get uncomfortable. The way they respond and say they have to check in with their husband maybe feels different than somebody saying, oh yeah, let me make sure Tommy's okay with it, right? There's a difference in tone, and somebody's really uncomfortable and clearly has does not have access to their money. That might be something you might recognize. Or maybe they, stop going to Starbucks with you because they say they can't afford it, or it's not in the budget, things like that you might see. My understanding, this was before I started, but like we've had clients who, in order to drive to our offices, we would give them like a little bit of petty cash for them to refill their gas tank up. So their partner, because they don't have their own cash, and their partner monitored how much gas they had in the car, right? So they would know, oh, you drove those, I see the gas tank is lower, where did you go? And in order for them to stay coming to SHALVA safely, we would give them, $10 to refill their tank, things like that. Spiritual abuse is certainly something we talk about at SHALVA. Very generally, it can be somebody not being able to practice religiously how they want to, or somebody being forced to practice their religion in a way that's making them feel uncomfortable or unsafe. It could be somebody like distorting religious text. We see that a lot with our more religious clients or Orthodox clients. My husband says that it is a commandment to do XYZ, or it's the wife's responsibility to have peace in the home. Like that's a part of more religious Jewish homes, is something called shalom bayit, peace in the home. And so oftentimes after an incident, the husband will say to a wife, well, you're responsible for peace in the home, so that was your fault that that happened. So kind of distorting religious culture or texts to continue the abuse, things like that. And then of course, sexual abuse. So whether it's forcing sexual activities or withholding sexual activities, reproductive coercion, somebody who is flaunting affairs or infidelity. And again, that's something that could be happening out in the open among other people, right? Something that they're bragging about to their, to your friends, partners. And it gets back to you, like that's certainly something that could indicate abuse as well. And also just not good. So those are all the types of abuse. I know I ran through that really quickly, and there's certainly a lot of nuance and different components to each of those types. But again, it's not, the thing that is hard is it's not, check these 3 boxes and it's an abusive relationship. It is really how somebody is feeling in that relationship and how you might be feeling in kind of seeing what's going on or hearing what's going on or seeing less of what's going on and recognizing that isolation, like I said. You don't need certain things for it to be abuse. The things that are important are the power and control and the pattern that's going on, that it's a consistent situation happening. So I like to share a little bit about, does anybody have any questions? I go through this all, it's so much information. And like I said, I'm from New Jersey, so I talk a lot. So please feel free to ask a question. You're all good? Okay. So I do like to talk about barriers to leaving. First of all, I don't think I have this elsewhere in the presentation, but I think it's important to say it is extremely difficult for somebody to leave an abusive relationship, partially for all the reasons we just talked about. Oh, it looks like, do you have a question? Okay, taking it in, great. So it takes somebody a long time, and part of why it takes somebody a long time is it is the most dangerous time for somebody in an abusive relationship when they are trying to leave. You can imagine if somebody decides to leave, their partner gets wind of it, you're basically saying to that partner, I'm taking control back. You don't have it anymore. I'm leaving this situation. And all this person wants is control over you. So that is the time where they are going to be the most violent, the most volatile. And so often what happens when somebody tries to leave, and this is something I'll talk about later, but I'll mention it here as well. The person who's in relationship with somebody perpetrating abuse knows that relationship best. And so they might want to leave, take an action, recognize the danger they are putting themselves and their children in, and decide, I'm going to stay because that's safer for me right now than trying to leave. So I think it's about an average of 7. There's an average of 7, somebody tries to leave an average of 7 times before they actually leave, if they ever even choose to leave. Somebody asks us, people often ask the question in terms of the therapy that we do, what do we do if somebody comes to a therapist and doesn't want to leave? That's the reality for a lot of our clients. Our therapists are not there to say, okay, you're here, you're in the office, what's your plan? When are you going? They do safety planning to make sure they're safe depending on the situation that they're in and whatever their choices are. But we are not there, and this is an important thing for friends and loved ones to think about too. We're not there to tell this person what to do. We're there to support this person. I'm going to dive into that later. I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but as I mentioned, like some of the things we touched on earlier are barriers to somebody to even want to leave. There might be a financial component to it. It might be that they don't want to disrupt their children's lives by leaving. That's a huge one. The reality is these relationships are not typically abusive 24/7. If they were, it would be much easier to say, I'm out of here much sooner. But there is good stuff happening. There is love within this relationship. And so that's that cycle of abuse that you may have heard of, right? Especially after there's a big incident, there is often apologizing, there's gift giving, there's I'm going to change, I need you to help me change, all of these things. And sometimes there is good stuff, right? Like sometimes you do have a date and it feels really good, or you have a really intimate moment that reminds you why you love this person. All of those things help keep somebody in the relationship. There's certainly shame and self-blame, low self-esteem, all of these things that go into somebody feeling like they don't want to leave or they can't leave. And as you can imagine, some of those things are also really connected to not wanting to even reach out to a friend or loved one for support. Not being believed is really an important one too. And that's partially like, I would encourage you among your friends, among your book club, among your gym, like talk about even just attending this presentation. One thing you learned that opens the door. You're not saying to somebody, hey, is everything okay? But you're saying, hey, I learned this thing today at this presentation and it was so interesting. And that just opens the door a little bit more for somebody to say, okay, they took time to go to this presentation, learn about abuse. They must believe that this is a thing and that this might be happening. So use even today as a way to kind of open the door among your friends and loved ones or children. But this is certainly not an extensive list of barriers as to why somebody would leave. So these are some red flags. If a person is, like I said, kind of isolating, spending less time with others, that's certainly something as friends you might recognize. If they're really open about it, if they're saying they're not feeling safe, certainly a red flag. If there's appearance changes, if you've known somebody for years and they dress a certain way or their hair's a certain way, and all of a sudden, you know, there's rapid weight loss, or they start dressing in baggier clothes, or they wear less makeup, or they get a really short hair. There's so many things that, you know, maybe that coincides with them starting to be in relationship with somebody new. And you're thinking, I wonder why this is happening. Something to explore with them and ask questions about. If someone's making excuses that aren't making sense to you, especially as to like why they're not around, again, if you're getting a weird gut feeling about some of the things they're saying to you, it is important to explore that for yourself. I touched on some of these, but their partner is texting them all the time, saying things in front of others that is making everybody uncomfortable, controlling money, acting jealous in public. That is something we see sometimes, right? We probably can think of examples throughout our lives where we see somebody, why are you over there with this person? Why are you doing this? Come over here with me. Why are you talking to that person? We've seen this happen throughout our life, and it's really hard to label something as what it actually is. Okay, so before I dive into that, I'll pause again for questions if anybody has any. Okay. So here's kind of the crux of, I love these next two slides. It's helpful statements, and then we'll talk about some harmful statements when we are thinking about talking to somebody in our life, either who we're worried about, or someone did disclose something to us, you know, saying they feel unsafe in their home, something like that. Saying that you believe them is such an important thing. If that's the first thing out of your mouth, that's a great start, right? I believe you, I'm here for you. Thank you for sharing that with me, right? This person, if they tell you something, it is such a big step for them. Who knows how long they've been holding it in, and for them to feel comfortable enough to talk to you, you want to validate that right away. Talking about their safety, I want to make sure you're safe. That's the number one thing I'm thinking about, is a really great thing to talk about. Telling them that you're there for them and saying that you'll keep this confidential will help them, you know, continue to come back to you. If they feel like you're going to turn around and tell other people, or something like that, it might kind of damage that trust that they had in you and coming to you in the first place. So saying that like you can be a trusted, confidential place for them is important. And I'll mention too, you know, something like the tool on our website I mentioned, the Show You Care tool. Keeping someone's confidence doesn't mean that you can't reach out for support for yourself, because this is such a hard thing to manage. If you are, you know, supporting a friend who's going through this, feel free to reach out to a resource like SHALVA or somebody else to get some support for yourself, to get that validation for yourself that you're saying the right thing and encouraging the right things. Letting somebody know that it's not their fault, and encouraging them to reach out to someone. Something I think is great to say is, I'm here for you. I am here as an ear. I'm here to, plan whatever you want. And I'm not an expert. I mean, I've even said this to somebody before. These are such complicated situations. I'm not a social worker. I do outreach. And so I'm very honest when people come to me and say, I want to make sure you're getting the best help you can get. If I can make a call with you, if I can encourage you to make a call, I want to encourage you to do that. And I'm here for you. Try not to, you don't want to take the place of the expert, because these are such nuanced and sometimes dangerous situations, but encouraging somebody to go to an expert is a great thing to do. And like I said, well, I think this comes on the next slide, sorry. So those are some helpful statements that are great to share, and just a general kind of, things that you want to make sure you're emphasizing when somebody does come to you. And if somebody doesn't come to you, but you're worried, saying something like, I feel I'm here for you. I want to make sure you're safe. Is everything okay? And even asking those open-ended questions, even if they say no, or if they say yes, I'm fine, but you continue to check in with them in a very kind of easy way. And then if they want to move on, you move on. That's a great thing to do, because if you ask somebody how they're doing in this context like 50 times, and then the 51st time they say, thank you for asking, I am in trouble, I do feel unsafe at home, then it's worth asking those 50 times and being consistent, right? So sticking with it and not getting frustrated, especially if you know something is going on and they're not talking to you. That consistency is really important. So a couple of things we encourage you to avoid saying to somebody. So the first thing, are you a victim of domestic violence? That, generally, labels are really complicated things in all sorts of contexts. So labeling a relationship as abuse, or I want to add to this, labeling somebody's partner as abusive, is not the most helpful thing to say to somebody, because it's really, really scary. So talking about behaviors and labeling behaviors, it really worried me when I saw that your partner texted you 40 times in a row, literally. How did it make you feel? Is different than saying, I hated that guy, he sucks, right? That's not a useful thing to say to somebody. Again, because there is love in this relationship. And so if we shut down the person they're talking about, they're in partnership with, we're also shutting the door to them coming to us and feeling safe coming to us. So not labeling the person and not labeling the relationship continues to make it feel safe and comfortable for somebody to come to you as a support. We, of course, don't want to really talk about their part in this. So if they say, this really scary thing happened last night, I'm really worried about my safety. And you say, well, what did you do? That is not a helpful thing to say. So we want to really kind of keep it, talking about the behaviors that they're experiencing and how they're feeling about it, rather than saying, so, well, if he said you burnt dinner, did you burn dinner? That's not helpful. Why haven't you left yet? Hopefully having the knowledge, if you didn't before this conversation, around how hard it is to leave. You can imagine why that is a really difficult question for somebody to hear. And oftentimes people are really, really, really conflicted about leaving and not leaving, which makes that question particularly hard. Couples counseling. So couples counseling is one of those spaces where it's actually a tool that abusers often use to continue their abuse. You really need equity within a relationship for couples counseling to work. And when there's not equity in the relationship, it's just a place where somebody can continue to assert their power. So they might often, we hear of, the therapist getting manipulated by this person also, really getting the therapist on their side. And so then they leave counseling, they say, see, the therapist said this, and this great thing about me, you're the problem. Or if and so then the partner who's experiencing abuse doesn't say anything, right? Or if the person experiencing abuse is in counseling and they do disclose something that happened, the consequences that come from that after that therapy appointment, it can be very dangerous, right? Like there's a reprimand that happens if someone's in there and says, well, you did this thing to me, or, you came after me, or you punched the wall, or you slapped me, or whatever. They're not going to like that. And there's going to be concerns afterwards. So couples counseling is not a safe space for somebody who's experiencing abuse. And then call the police. So this is one example, but I think, and I might have said this before, but if I did, I apologize. And I'll say it's worth saying again. If we are telling somebody what to do, call the police, get a lawyer, go to counseling, do this thing, you need to leave. Even if it's coming from the best place possible in our hearts, we're trying to help our friend get out of a bad situation. If we're telling them what to do, it actually is mimicking the behavior of an abuser, right? All our role can really be is to help empower this person and help this person get their voice back, because they've lost their voice. The person perpetrating abuse has taken their voice from them. And so the best thing to do is to really help them get their voice back and make the best decision for themselves. We don't know what that decision is because we're not in that situation, nor are we abuse experts, right? So the best thing we can do is support them and encourage them to figure out the safest thing for them to do. And it's not to tell them what to do. Okay. I do have two scenarios, but I do, of course, want to pause for questions or thoughts. As I've kind of concluded my presentation piece, beside the two scenarios I have for you, would love to know what you guys are thinking about, or what's sitting with you, or how you're feeling, or of course, any questions you might have.
You were speaking about the couple counseling, and another little thing of that was I had an ex-husband who encouraged us to go to couples counseling, and I found out after or during the session that he had already made contact with the counselor and told his whole story, which was not the correct story. And so in the middle of the counseling session, the counselor asked about a friend of mine who I had never mentioned in the session. So you can think that you're helping by saying go to couples counseling, but it can definitely be a not safe area. So I appreciate that inclusion in there.
Thank you for sharing that, Pam. Yeah, it's, the other thing, if you also, whether you're in couples counseling currently or you have your own therapist, a lot of our SHALVA clients have other therapists, or they are going to couples counseling to keep their partner happy, but they're getting the DV specific support from SHALVA as well. So our therapist, and then we can get releases, right, and talk to those other therapists that are involved and try to get like a real holistic approach when that feels safe and comfortable as well. But that's a great point, Pam. Thank you so much for sharing. Okay, we have a question. How would you start a conversation with a loved one who you suspect is in an abusive relationship with their partner and has already isolated them? If we have not talked to our loved one for years, how do we best start to open the conversation again? Great question, Erin. And I think the best we can do is try our best to reach out to them without, it's always this tricky balance of not wanting to raise alarm bells among the person who's perpetrating abuse, right? But if they've isolated, send them a letter, right? Send them a letter or send them a text and say, hey, I don't know if you're getting this. Send them a message on Facebook, not anything about what you're thinking about their relationship, but just checking in and saying hi. That person who's in the situation might think that they've isolated themselves. Nobody's going to want to talk to them because they haven't been around for so many years. And so you just reaching out and saying, hey, do you have any plans this summer? I'm sorry we haven't touched base in so long. How are you? you know, me and the wife are great, whatever it is, right? Just starting that dialogue in a different way. If they, if you haven't been able to reach them, like writing a letter could be a great way to do it. Sending a message on Facebook could be great. This is where, you know, sometimes technology can be a positive thing. But again, I wouldn't start by saying, hey, are you okay? Especially on things like social media or on somebody's phone, because you don't know if that stuff is being monitored, but you can still check in and say, hey, how's it going? And if they don't respond, that doesn't mean you shouldn't try again in 3 months, right? Keep trying and seeing how they're doing, and like a really soft touch in as many ways as you feel comfortable doing. I hope that was helpful. Yes, DV stands for domestic violence. Thanks, Marty. Great. Okay, so I wrote up well, any other thoughts or questions? Following the couple's counselor comment, is it ever ethical or appropriate to alert a counselor that there is abuse going on so they have that context to avoid that manipulation concern? That's a great question, Haley. You know, I honestly don't know I'm trying to think of like the liability, and if they're a counselor to both of you, like is it okay for them to like, can they then tell the partner that this came up or something? I don't know the answer, but it's a great question for our helpline, to be honest. And I can certainly ask and follow up and send that answer. I think it's a great question. I would err on not telling that counselor, because you don't know how they feel about the situation. You don't know how much education they have on abuse. You don't know if that's going to kind of, you know, further harm your case. Like, we have situations where there's couples counseling going on, and the perpetrator of abuse is basically on the side telling the counselor, my partner is crazy, like actually on medication, actually, you know, needs additional help because of their mental health issues. And so you don't know what your partner is saying to them. So those are the things I'm thinking about, but I'm honestly, I'm not sure. But one thing we love to do at SHALVA is offer educational programs to therapists, to couples counselors, to individual therapists, so they can better understand and can refer to a place like SHALVA if they do suspect something is going on. But therapists hold a lot, and so they don't always have as much education as they should on every topic that they should, including domestic abuse. Are there couples counselors that are specifically trained in these areas so you can recommend a counselor that's best equipped to see through these dynamics? Any SHALVA recommendations? So we really don't offer couples. We don't recommend couples counselors ever, because the dynamic would be so hard. Like, it would be so hard for a couple to sit in the room with a counselor together because of the dynamics. Like, if somebody wants to get help from SHALVA and then their partner is getting help from a PAPE program, which is I forget what PAPE stands for, but it's a program that helps abusers who want to get better, which there's some great programs out there. Like, they could be getting their own support separately, but I don't think there is a lot of space. There's none that are coming to mind for me where also doing counseling together is appropriate at the same time. As sometimes in a PAPE program, not all of them have this, but they will invite the partner if they are interested in that piece, and depending on the program and kind of the format of it. But I don't think that there is like a couples counselor that can help with that. Now that I've asked you guys for questions, I don't know all the answers. I feel silly. But I can follow up on these, Haley. These are great questions. PAPE, P-A-I-P. And I cannot for the life of me remember what it stands for. But there's a couple. So the YWCA, It has a great PAPE program. That's probably the most well-known one. And then there's a couple others. Catholic Charities, I think, has a good one. I think that's what it's called. There's a couple of good programs out there in the Chicagoland area. Those programs are really great, and they don't have a high success rate, because it takes a lot for somebody who is perpetrating abuse to recognize that what they're doing is wrong. And so ultimately, a lot of, thank you, partner abuse intervention program. So, you guys are great. So a lot of people who attend those programs, it's court mandated and they don't want to be there, so they're not successful. So they can be really great programs, but there's very few people who are in there because they want to be in there, because they want to reform. Sometimes they're in there because it's court mandated. That's kind of the biggest one. They're court mandated, but they are really, really great programs. Okay. Are there other questions? I want to be mindful of time, and I don't want to throw these scenarios out at you if it doesn't feel like something you want to do right now. But I'll read this one out loud, and you guys tell me what you think. Your close friend is recently divorced and started dating someone new a few months ago. There's a few things going on that worry you about the relationship. You've been seeing your friend way less than you used to, not for lack of trying. She quit the book club you're both a part of. You've met the new boyfriend twice, and both times you don't like that he ordered for her. He talked the majority of the time, and your friend was acting different. She was much quieter than normal and a bit withdrawn. You're happy she's with someone after a contentious divorce, but something feels off. What do you do? Any thoughts? And feel free to come off mute and chat, or write something in the actual chat.
I think just going to that one slide that you had, talking about helpful hints to say would be where my mind is kind of going. Checking in on you. I haven't seen you around for a little bit. Just want to make sure that everything's safe. But doing it in a not so publicly, like, social media space.
Mm-hmm. That's great, Pam. Yeah. Like finding some private space for you to maybe check in with this person. Yeah, absolutely. Any other thoughts with that one? I'll add to, like, unfortunately, and I can tell you, like, I've certainly been in this situation more than once, and a lot of us probably have been because of the statistics. But the reality is sometimes doing nothing is the best thing we can do. It's the safest thing we can do. And it's the only thing we can do. And so I think sometimes as a friend also trying to support somebody else, doing nothing feels really terrible, but it might be the right thing. And that, again, is where, if you are worried about somebody, giving a call to a place like SHALVA or anywhere else you feel comfortable, or there's like online chats and stuff too. Getting support as what we call a third party is a great thing to do, and I really encourage you to do, because it is so difficult to watch somebody go through this and to know there's really nothing you can do. Okay, we only have 4 minutes left, so I'll go off of screen share here, and I'll just say, I really appreciate, again, you all being here today. If you have a second, I would love for you to take this brief survey. I'll put it in the chat now or later. If you can just grab it and fill out this survey. It's really helpful to hear from you what you thought of this program. If this is something you'd want to do again, if you have other ideas, if you hated this, please let us know. It's very important. And I want to mention too, I mentioned our luncheon. We had a great luncheon a couple of years ago. Our other luncheon is coming up in just a couple of weeks, and it's virtual. It's right around this time of the day, so it's a great lunchtime experience. It's a really powerful story. It's actually a panel discussion with a number of people who were kind of all around this woman who was unfortunately killed by her husband a couple of years ago, and really talks about how, really related to what we're talking about here, right? Abusive relationships don't just impact the couple in the relationship, they impact, there's a ripple effect that occurs. It's friends, it's family members, it's teachers, it's the children, it's a lot of people around them. And so that's the topic we're going to be exploring in this luncheon. It's going to be really powerful, a really powerful and special story. So feel free to join us for that as well. And I'll put my email address in the chat as well if you have any questions for me, or if anything comes up. I would love to talk with you, and really appreciate you guys being here.
Thank you, Jordyn. That was amazing. I learned a lot, as well as, yeah, just appreciate the fact that talks like this exist. To those people on the call, feel free to grab your links before the end of the call, because they will go away. There is a little talk in there, a little from Haley in there. So any last minute questions for Jordyn? Otherwise, we're going to start to wrap up, if that's okay. Again, thank you to Mardi, actually, for bringing this talk to us, and Jordyn to us. So thank you. We appreciate people at the Y bringing more community members to join in on talks like our YMCA education talk. So thank you so much. That ends today's YES programming. I would like to thank SHALVA, Mardi, and Jordyn once again. Please check out our talks at nsymca.org/YES. Our YouTube video of this presentation will be up there in about by 1:30 maybe today, in about a half hour. We're free and open to the public. Join us for any of our future talks. Those future talks are also there. Our next talk is Tuesday, June 13th at 11 a.m. It's the Elder Wellbeing Assessment, a unique tool that creates clarity in the chaos of the elder transition, brought to us by Elder Smart. So hopefully we'll see that. And hopefully we'll get SHALVA join us again, maybe in the fall, or towards the winter. We'd love to see you do another talk again. So thank you so much for everyone today. I think we're all good. Awesome. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.